My dearest, your strength is my comfort, and your eyes hold the stars I wish upon.
Let's try it again tonight, Helena said, and Thomas looked at the calendar on the wall. 6 months. 6 months of marriage, and he'd barely touched her. 6 months of sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. 6 months of her trying to reach for him, and him pulling away, claiming exhaustion, claiming ranch work, claiming anything but the truth. I can't, he said, his voice breaking. Helena, I can't. You don't understand what you're asking. Then tell me! Her voice was louder than he'd ever heard it, and when he turned, she was crying, this strong, beautiful woman who could outwork any man in the territory, crying like her heart was breaking. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me why you can't stand to touch me. Tell me why you look at me like I'm a stranger. Tell me, because I'm not a man anymore. The words exploded out of Thomas with 6 months of shame behind them. The shrapnel at Petersburg didn't just take my leg function. It took everything. I can't give you children. I can't give you the family you deserve. And every time you look at me with hope in your eyes, I want to die because I'm a fraud and a failure, and you crossed an ocean for nothing. The silence was deafening. Then Helena's face did something he'd never seen before. It crumpled with relief. Oh, Thomas, she breathed, and she was crossing the room, her hands reaching for his face with such tenderness it hurt to see. Thomas, my darling fool, I can't have children either. I've been barren since I was 16, and I've spent 6 months thinking you were the one who couldn't stand to touch me, because my body is too big, too strong, too masculine, too much. They stared at each other, both crying now, and Thomas felt something inside him break open. We've been hiding the same secret. For 6 months, Helena sobbed. 6 months of both of us suffering alone when we could have been. She didn't finish. He pulled her into his arms, and they collapsed to the floor together, holding each other like the world was ending. And in a way, it was. The world of shame and hiding and loneliness was ending. And something else, something real, was finally beginning. The bedroom floor was hard beneath them, but neither noticed. Thomas buried his face in Helena's shoulder and shook with sobs. He'd been holding back since the field hospital at Petersburg, since the surgeon had told him in clinical terms that the shrapnel had destroyed more than just tissue and bone. Helena held him with arms that could break fence posts, but were gentle now, stroking his hair, whispering words in Swedish that he didn't understand but felt in his chest anyway. I thought you hated me, she said finally, her voice muffled against his shirt. Every night you turned away. Every morning you left before I woke up. I thought my body disgusted you. In Sweden, men told me I was too much, too tall, too strong, too masculine. I came here thinking maybe American men were different, but when you wouldn't touch me, I thought... Her voice broke. I thought I'd crossed an ocean just to find out I was still too much for anyone to love. Thomas pulled back enough to look at her, and his hands were shaking when he cupped her face. You're not too much. You're magnificent. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and that's what made it worse. He laughed, bitter and broken. Because how could I ask someone like you to settle for someone like me? Someone who can't give you babies? Someone who can't even... He stopped, shame choking the words. Can't even what? Helena asked softly, and there was no judgment in her eyes, just desperate need to understand. Can't even make love to you properly, Thomas whispered, and the confession felt like dying. The injury damaged nerves. Things don't work the way they should. I can feel, but I can't. It's not... He was fumbling for words, his face burning with humiliation. I'm broken in ways that matter. Helena was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas prepared himself for pity or disappointment or worse. Understanding that really meant resignation. Instead, she started to laugh. Not cruel laughter, not mocking, but the kind of laughter that comes when you realize the universe has played an absurd joke, and all you can do is appreciate the twisted humor of it. What? Thomas asked, confused and a little hurt. We're both so stupid, Helena said, wiping her eyes. So incredibly beautifully stupid. You've been avoiding me because you think you can't make love properly. I've been terrified to try because I thought you'd discover my body is wrong inside, that the fever left scars everywhere, that touching me there might disgust you." She took his hands in hers, dwarfing them. "Thomas, I don't need perfect. I don't even know what perfect is supposed to feel like. I just need you, however that looks, however that works. But what if it doesn't work at all?" The fear in his voice was raw and young, and Helena realized he wasn't a 34-year-old war veteran in this moment. He was a boy who'd been told he was less than whole. "Then we figure it out together," she said firmly. "We have hands. We have mouths. We have hearts that want to connect, even if our bodies don't cooperate perfectly. And Thomas," she waited until he met her eyes. "I've never been with a man before, never, because I was too afraid they'd reject me once they knew I was barren. So whatever we create together, it's ours. We get to define it. No one else gets to tell us what it should look like." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, like a locked door finally opening. "I've been so afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd leave once you knew. Afraid you'd stay out of pity. Afraid that every day you'd wake up and regret crossing an ocean for a broken man." "And I've been afraid," Helena echoed, "that every day you'd wake up and regret sending for a woman who can't give you sons to carry your name, who can't give you the dynasty every man wants." "I don't want a dynasty," Thomas said, and he meant it with everything in him. "I want a partner. I want someone to laugh with at breakfast and work beside during the day and hold in the dark. I want someone who sees me, all of me, even the broken parts, and chooses to stay anyway." "Then you have her," Helena said simply. "You've had her since the day I arrived. I just didn't know you wanted her." They stayed on the floor until the lamp oil burned low and shadows filled the corners of the room. They talked about Petersburg and the field hospital and the surgeon who delivered the diagnosis like he was commenting on the weather. Helena talked about the fever at 16, about waking up to her mother crying because the doctor said she'd never carry children, about the village women who'd started treating her differently after that, like she was cursed or contagious or simply less than. "I became strong because I thought if I couldn't be a mother, I could at least be useful," Helena said. "I worked my father's farm like a man, outworked the hired men, made myself so valuable they couldn't dismiss me even though I was unmarriageable." She looked down at her muscular arms. "And then my father died, and my mother followed 6 months later, and the farm went to my cousin's husband, and suddenly I was useless again. Just a barren woman taking up space." "You're not useless," Thomas said fiercely. "Helena, you've done more work on this ranch in 6 months than I managed in 2 years alone. The north fence that was falling, fixed. The irrigation system I'd been trying to figure out, you redesigned it in a week." That's not what I mean," Helena interrupted gently. "I know I'm useful for work. I've always been useful for work. But I wanted someone to want me for more than what I could do. I wanted someone to want me for who I am." She took a shaky breath. "I wanted to be loved, Thomas. Not needed, not tolerated, loved. I do love you." The words came out before Thomas could stop them, and once they were out, he realized he meant them completely. "I've loved you since the 3rd day you were here and you sang while you worked, and I realized you were happy. Actually happy, despite everything. Despite me avoiding you and sleeping in the barn and being a coward. You were still happy, and I thought..." His voice cracked. "I thought if I told you about the injury, you'd stop being happy, and I couldn't bear to be the one who took that away from you." Helena's eyes were spilling over again, but she was smiling. "You foolish, beautiful man. You didn't take anything from me. You gave me everything I'd given up hoping for." She kissed him then, soft and tentative, and Thomas felt something inside him that had been frozen since the war finally began to thaw. When they finally climbed into bed that night, they didn't make love. Not in the way the marriage manuals described, or the way Thomas had always imagined. But they touched. They explored. They learned each other's bodies without shame or performance or fear. And when Helena fell asleep with her head on his chest and his arms around her, Thomas realized that this honest, imperfect, real connection was worth more than any fantasy of what should have been. For the first time in 6 months, he didn't sleep in the barn. For the first time since Petersburg, he didn't feel broken. And for the first time in his life, he understood that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being seen. Morning light came through the window, soft and golden, and Helen awoke to the unfamiliar warmth of Thomas's body beside hers. For a moment she held perfectly still, afraid that moving would break the spell, that he'd remember his shame and retreat back into silence. But then his arm tightened around her waist and she heard him whisper against her hair, "You're still here." "Where else would I be?" she whispered back and felt him smile against her shoulder. They lay there in the quiet dawn, neither wanting to break the fragile peace they'd found. Outside, the rooster crowed and the ranch demanded attention. But for once, Thomas didn't leap up and escape into work. He stayed, he held her, and Helena felt something she'd stopped believing in bloom, warm in her chest. Hope. "I want to try," Thomas said suddenly. "Last night you said we'd figure it out together." "I want to try. Not right now, not this second, but soon. I want to learn how to be your husband, in every way that matters, even if it doesn't look like what everyone expects." Helena turned in his arms to face him, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that made her heart ache. "We have time," she said gently. "We have the rest of our lives. There's no rush, no performance, no test to pass, just us learning each other." They rose and dressed, and for the first time in 6 months they moved through the morning routine together instead of in careful avoidance. Thomas made coffee while Helena gathered eggs. She split wood while he fed the horses. They worked side by side, fixing a broken stall door, and when their hands touched, passing a hammer, neither pulled away. It was the most ordinary morning of Helena's life. It was also the most perfect, but the peace couldn't last. Around midday, they heard a wagon approaching, and Thomas tensed immediately. "That's Doc Morrison," he said, recognizing the horse. "I didn't call for him." The doctor climbed down from his wagon, his weathered face kind but concerned. "Thomas, Mrs. Whitmore, I hope I'm not intruding, but I heard some talk in town yesterday, and I wanted to check on you both." "What kind of talk?" Helena asked. Though dread was already pooling in her stomach, Doc Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson was at the Mercantile yesterday afternoon. She was telling anyone who'd listen that 6 months of marriage without a baby means something's wrong. She's suggesting—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's suggesting Mrs. Whitmore might be barren, that perhaps she deceived you about her ability to bear children." Thomas's face went hard as stone. "Is that what people are saying?" "Some people. Not everyone." Doc Morrison held up his hands. "I'm not here to judge or pry. I'm here because I know how cruel small-town gossip can be, and I wanted to offer my support if you need it. Sometimes a word from a doctor can silence wagging tongues." Helena felt shame crash over her like a wave, hot and suffocating. This was what she'd feared since she was 16, being exposed, being blamed, being marked as defective. Her hands curled into fists, and she started to turn away. But Thomas caught her wrist gently. "Doc," Thomas said, his voice steady in a way Helena had never heard before. "I appreciate you coming out here. But the truth is, there's nothing wrong with my wife. The problem, if you want to call it that, is mine." Doc Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Thomas!" "The shrapnel injury at Petersburg," Thomas continued, and Helena could feel him shaking, but his voice never wavered. "It didn't just damage my leg. It damaged other things. I'm sterile, Doc, have been for 3 years. My wife has been nothing but patient and understanding about it, but the town seems determined to blame her for my inadequacy." The doctor was quiet for a long moment, studying Thomas's face. Then he said, "That injury was never in your medical records. The field hospital must not have documented it fully." "They documented it," Thomas said bitterly. "I just never told anyone here. I was ashamed. I thought if I just didn't talk about it, I could pretend it wasn't real." He glanced at Helena, and she saw love and determination in his eyes. "But I'm done pretending, and I'm done letting my wife take blame for something that has nothing to do with her." Doc Morrison nodded slowly. "I understand. And for what it's worth, Thomas, this doesn't make you less of a man. War takes many things from many men. You're not alone in this." I know that now, Thomas said, and squeezed Helena's hand. After the doctor left, Helena turned to Thomas with tears streaming down her face. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to claim it as only yours when we both— Yes, I did, Thomas interrupted firmly. Because you've carried shame that wasn't yours for 12 years. Because you left your entire country believing you were worthless. Because I love you, and I will not stand by while this town tears you apart for something neither of us can control. But they'll treat you differently now, Helena said desperately. The men will think— Let them think whatever they want, Thomas said. I've spent 3 years hiding from the truth. I'm done hiding. And if telling the truth means some men think less of me, then those aren't men whose opinions I value anyway. Helena pulled him into her arms and held him so tightly she worried she might hurt him. But he held her back just as fiercely. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Yes, you do, Thomas said. We both deserve to be happy. We both deserve to stop punishing ourselves for things we couldn't control. And we both deserve a life built on honesty instead of shame. That night, they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the ranch. And Thomas said quietly, Let's try it again tonight. Helena smiled, recognizing the words that had broken everything open. Try what? Being brave, Thomas said. Being honest. Choosing each other over what everyone else thinks we should be. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Let's try it every night. Let's build something real. Every night, Helena agreed. For the rest of our lives. The next 2 weeks tested everything they'd promised each other. Word spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Thomas Whitmore had admitted to being sterile. Some people responded with unexpected kindness. Others with cruelty that took Helena's breath away. At the feed store, a man Thomas had known for years turned his back when Thomas tried to make conversation. At church, women whispered behind their hands while staring at Helena with a mixture of pity and suspicion, like they couldn't decide if she was a saint for staying or a fool for marrying damaged goods. One rancher made a joke about half a man running half a ranch, and Helena had to physically hold Thomas back from throwing a punch. But the worst came on a Tuesday afternoon when they rode into town for supplies. They were loading the wagon when Mrs. Patterson approached. Her face twisted with false sympathy that made Helena's skin crawl. Mrs. Whitmore, I just wanted to say how sorry I am, she began, loud enough that people nearby stopped to listen. It must be such a trial, being married to a man who can't fulfill his duties. If you wanted to have the marriage annulled, no one would blame you. A woman has a right to children, after all. Helena felt Thomas go rigid beside her, felt his shame like a physical thing, and something inside her snapped. Mrs. Patterson, Helena said, her voice carrying across the street with the force of a thunderclap. You seem very concerned about my marriage. So let me make something clear. I didn't cross an ocean for children. I crossed it for a partner. For a man who treats me with respect and kindness. For someone who sees me as a person instead of a broodmare. She stepped forward, and Mrs. Patterson actually took a step back. My husband is more of a man than any who would judge him for wounds he got defending this country. And if you have nothing better to do than speculate about our bedroom, then I pity your own marriage. The street went silent. Mrs. Patterson's face turned purple with rage and embarrassment. Thomas stared at Helena with something like awe. How dare you speak to me? Mrs. Patterson sputtered. I dare because someone needs to, Helena interrupted. You spend your days tearing other people down to make yourself feel important. You judge women for being childless without knowing their pain. You mock men for wounds they didn't choose. And you do it all while pretending to be Christian and kind. She turned to address the growing crowd. My husband and I cannot have children. Both of us, we are both infertile, and we are both tired of hiding it to protect the feelings of people who show us no kindness in return. She heard Thomas's sharp intake of breath beside her, but when she glanced at him, he nodded. Permission, support, trust. We are building a marriage based on love and partnership, Helena continued, not on what society says we should be or should want. And if that makes us unmarriageable, if that makes us less than in your eyes, then we will wear that judgment proudly. Because we would rather be honest and happy than acceptable and miserable. She took Thomas's hand, held it high so everyone could see. This is my husband. These are his scars. This is my body. These are our choices. And we don't need your approval to be whole. The walk back to the wagon felt like crossing a battlefield. But when they climbed up onto the seat, Thomas pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You're magnificent," he whispered. "Absolutely magnificent." "I'm terrified," Helena admitted, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I just made an enemy of half the town. Then we'll face them together," Thomas said. "Besides, I think you made some friends too." He was right. As they started to drive away, a young woman approached the wagon hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 20, her face pale and anxious. "Mrs. Whitmore," she called out. "I'm Sarah Jenkins." "I just wanted to say," she glanced around nervously, then rushed forward. "My husband and I have been married 3 years. No children. Everyone blames me. But last month we finally saw a doctor in the next county and learned it's him. The mumps as a boy. He made me swear never to tell anyone because he was so ashamed." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you for what you said. Thank you for making us feel less alone." Helena reached down and squeezed the girl's hand. "You're not alone. Neither of you are." As they rode home, Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I keep thinking about what you said, about both of us being infertile. You didn't have to tell them that. You could have let them think it was only me. We're in this together," Helena said simply. "Your shame is my shame. Your burden is my burden, and your courage gives me courage." She looked at him sideways. "Besides, I meant what I said. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting fear decide how we live." That night, they lay in bed facing each other in the darkness, and Thomas traced the line of Helena's jaw with gentle fingers. "Let's try it again tonight," he said softly. "Try what?" Helena whispered. "Being us," Thomas said. "No walls, no fear. Just honest and imperfect and real." Helena kissed him, slow and deep, and felt his body respond in ways he'd told her it couldn't. Not perfectly, not like the books described, but real and warm and theirs. They made love that night in their own way, learning what brought pleasure, what caused pain, what made them laugh and what made them gasp. And when they finally fell asleep tangled together, both were smiling. They'd lost the approval of some, but they'd gained something worth far more. They'd gained each other completely and without reservation, and that made them richer than any couple with a dozen children could ever be. 3 months passed, and the ranch that had felt like a prison of silence transformed into something neither Thomas nor Helena had expected, a sanctuary. It started small. Sarah Jenkins came by one afternoon with her husband Daniel, a quiet man whose shame had carved lines into his young face. They sat on the porch drinking coffee, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel spoke about the guilt he carried, about feeling like less than a man, about watching his wife take the blame for his inadequacy and being too cowardly to stop it. "You're not a coward," Thomas said firmly. "You're scared. There's a difference. But staying scared is what makes us cowards. Speaking truth is what makes us brave." A week later, an older couple arrived, married 23 years without children. They'd stopped talking about it decades ago, had built their life around the silence, but the silence had calcified into loneliness. Helena made them dinner, and they talked until midnight. And when they left, the woman hugged Helena so tightly she could barely breathe. "I haven't talked about this in 15 years, the woman whispered. "I forgot what it felt like not to carry it alone." More came. A widower whose late wife had been infertile, still grieving, still wondering if he'd failed her by not loving her enough to make it not matter. A young man terrified to court anyone because a childhood illness had left him sterile. A woman who'd had 3 miscarriages and been told by her church that it was punishment for her sins. The ranch became a place where people could be broken without being judged, where infertility wasn't a shameful secret, but a shared reality, where Thomas and Helena's honesty gave others permission to be honest too, but not everyone approved. Reverend Holbrook came calling one Sunday afternoon, his expression stern and disapproving. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you about the gatherings you've been hosting." "What about them?" Thomas asked, though he could guess. It's inappropriate, the Reverend said stiffly. Men and women discussing intimate matters, speaking openly about marital relations and childlessness. It's unseemly. It's necessary, Helena interrupted quietly. These people have nowhere else to go. Nowhere else where they can speak truth without being condemned. The church should be that place, Reverend Holbrook said. Should be, Thomas agreed. But it isn't. Not when you preach that childlessness is a curse. Not when you suggest that infertility is God's judgment. Not when people leave your services feeling more ashamed than when they arrived. The Reverend's face reddened. I have never said. You don't have to say it directly, Helena said. When you preach about the blessing of children, about fruitfulness being godly, about God opening wombs and closing them as reward and punishment, you say it. And people like us hear it loud and clear. We are not blessed. We are not fruitful. God has closed our wombs. Therefore we are not godly. That's not what I meant. It's what we heard, Thomas said. It's what we all heard. And we're tired of it. After the Reverend left, stiff with disapproval, Helena turned to Thomas with worry in her eyes. We might have just made an enemy of the church. Then the church isn't following the God I believe in, Thomas said. The one I learned about said, come to me all who are weary and burdened, not come to me all who are perfect and acceptable. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Thomas and Helena sat on their porch, as had become their ritual. But this time, they weren't alone. 4 couples sat with them, talking and laughing and sharing stories. The ranch felt alive in a way it never had, filled with people who'd found safety in honesty. Later, after everyone left, Thomas pulled Helena into his arms in their bedroom and held her close. Do you have any regrets? He asked quietly. About coming here? About marrying a broken man? About our life looking nothing like what you probably dreamed? Helena pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were clear and certain. I regret nothing. This life, this strange, imperfect, beautiful life we've built, it's better than any dream I had. Because it's real, Thomas. It's honest. It's ours. Let's try it again tonight, Thomas said, smiling at the words that had become their private promise. Try what? Helena asked, though she knew the answer. Everything, Thomas said. Love. Courage, honesty, building something that matters even when the world says we shouldn't. He kissed her softly. Let's try being happy in a world that tells us we should be ashamed. Let's try creating family in a way that has nothing to do with blood. Let's try showing people that brokenness isn't the end of the story. It's just a different beginning. Every night, Helena whispered against his lips. For the rest of our lives. They made love that night the way they'd learned to, imperfect, unconventional, uniquely theirs. And when they lay tangled together afterward, both satisfied in ways that had nothing to do with textbook expectations and everything to do with genuine connection, Thomas realized something profound. He'd spent 3 years thinking the war had taken his manhood. But lying here with Helena, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart, he understood the truth. His manhood had never been about what his body could or couldn't do. It was about showing up, about choosing love over fear, about standing beside this remarkable woman and building something meaningful from their shared brokenness. I love you, he said into the darkness. I know, Helena said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. I've known since the 3rd day I was here, when you thought I wasn't looking, and you watched me sing while I worked like I was the most fascinating thing you'd ever seen. You were, Thomas said. You are. You always will be. 10 years later, their ranch would be famous throughout the territory, not for cattle or crops, but for being the place where broken people found healing, where couples struggling with infertility found community, where men and women who thought they were worthless discovered they were valuable beyond measure. Thomas and Helena never had biological children, but they fostered 7 over the years. Children no one else wanted, children with disabilities and difficult pasts and uncertain futures. They loved them fiercely and taught them that family was about choice, not blood. That worth came from character, not capability. That brokenness was simply another word for human, but that was all ahead of them. Tonight, they were simply two people who'd found each other in the darkness, who'd chosen honesty over hiding, who'd built something real from the rubble of their shame. "Let's try it again tomorrow night," Helena murmured sleepily. "And every night after," Thomas promised, and they did. They tried at love when it was hard. They tried at courage when it was terrifying. They tried at hope when it seemed foolish. They tried at connection when the world told them they should be alone. They tried at building a legacy that had nothing to do with bloodline and everything to do with impact. They tried, and in trying, they discovered that satisfaction didn't come from meeting expectations. It came from exceeding them in ways no one expected. It came from two broken people creating something whole, not by fixing each other, but by accepting each other completely. It came from saying, "Let's try it again tonight," and meaning it with your whole heart. Not trying for perfection, just trying for real. And real, they learned, was always enough. Before we go, if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family. And share this with someone who needs to hear that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes our deepest wounds become the foundation for our greatest purpose. Thank you for being here, for listening, for being part of this community. Until next time, remember, love isn't about being perfect together. It's about being real together. And that makes all the difference in the world. The end.